All right, welcome to our webinar to highlight the School of Global Studies and our master's degree programs in community economic development and international community development. This should be a fun conversation with two alumni. I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves briefly. Hillary, you want to tell us about yourself, who you are first?
Yeah, totally. So I'm Hillary Haden. I graduated from the MAICD program in 2019. I think I was cohort 11, but I always mix that up. So I am now currently the organizing director for a national nonprofit that works on international trade policy. And then I also do some like adjunct faculty work for Brian and for another school. So that's me.
Cool. Andrew, tell us about yourself.
Sure. Andrew Ndayambaje, I'm a Human Services Coordinator at the City of Bellevue. And I also did ICD and finished last year. On the side note, I also a co-founder of a nonprofit organization operating in Uganda, and we're also planning to expand it. Thank you.
Cool. There are so many changes going on at the community level, in communities, in the community development sector itself. The technology is changing, right? We could spend a whole webinar just talking about AI and how that's going to affect communities and transform the community development sector. But our conversation today is a little more focused on peacemaking and advocacy specifically, right? The community development sector has really gone through a transformation in the last decade, 2 decades of kind of realizing this dynamic of we're really good at running projects. We've gotten really good over the decades at partnering with communities and working with them to articulate and achieve their own goals, kind of what we talk about co-powerment, this co-powerment model of doing community development. But over the years, it's become clear that the community development work requires something a little bit more proactive, not at the expense of the work that we've always done, but in addition to it, right? And that's largely looking like advocacy work and peacemaking. So doing that direct level community work, working with individuals and families and communities, but also realizing a lot of our community development work is dealing with some of the same challenges over and over again. And so in addition to continuing to work with communities to achieve their visions, we also all have to do at least some advocacy work or supporting other community development professionals who are doing advocacy work as well. We have to be meeting needs in the community, but we also have to be thinking about going upstream and turning off the spigot, making sure not so many people have as many needs and obstacles to achieving their visions for the community in the first place. And the work of doing that is that advocacy work, working with systems, helping people mitigate unintended consequences of the policies that they're thinking about new policies that really affect or remove obstacles for the community. And we really see all this work through a peacemaking lens, right? Our goal is not displacement of issues or just silence in the community, but really doing the hard work with the community to achieve the peaceful vision that we all want for our respective communities. So I'm so thankful that Hillary and Andrew are available, because both of their careers and their passions and their skill sets and the things that they're doing really embody that historic community development work and that advocacy work and that lens of peacemaking. So we wanted each of them to talk a little bit about the work that they're doing and how they see advocacy and peacemaking becoming more of an emphasis in this sector. So I'm going to ask Hillary first to talk about what peacemaking and advocacy in the community development world look like for you and for your work.
Totally. So I'm gonna take a step back and say to folks who are watching this webinar that before I ended up in the ICD program, I was working at World Relief Chicago. I was there the summer that the Central American miners were coming to the border. I was there the summer that ISIS was raiding refugee camps in Jordan, I think in Jordan. And there were tons of folks coming to Chicago. There were tons of families trying to be reunited. And I just remember as a kind of like a young person, right? Like a 22-year-old kid, basically, that had just graduated from school, being really, really overwhelmed by the amount of need that there was in the communities that I was like up close and personal with while I was doing that work in Chicago. But I also remember asking a question in that moment, which is, why did we ever create a system that did these kinds of things to people in the first place? Why did we create the immigration system that we did in this particular way? Why did we set up certain kinds of refugee resettlement systems in this particular way, and just really wrestling in that moment with systems level stuff, which I think kind of gets us to the advocacy piece. And I don't at all want to undermine that kind of work. I have thought at times in my adult life about going back to it. I really liked it. I enjoyed it. But I do think that there is a space for people to look, as Brian said, upstream and kind of think about what are the systems level things that are causing these problems. And I guess, so now my work is on global economic stuff. I work on everything from labor rights and labor trafficking to drug prices to food system stuff, environmental issues, a whole slate of things all impacted by US trade policy. And I really see my role in terms of the actual topic, advocacy is peacemaking, really reflected in the MLK quote that says, peace is not simply the absence of conflict, but the existence of justice for all people. And I think a lot of my work, both when I was back working for World Relief and the work that I do now on global economic advocacy, is rooted in picking the right conflicts that are going to bring a better world for all of us. So I think that's kind of the bulk of what I wanted to say, Brian, in terms of my relation to the topic, but I'm happy to answer more questions as the conversation rolls on.
Cool. It makes me think too about, I live in Tacoma, Washington, and for a while there, I don't know what it currently is this year, but a few years ago, the fastest gentrifying zip code in the United States was 98402, downtown Tacoma. And there was this conversation about we're the super gentrifying. A lot of the wealthier people are coming down from Seattle, and people who had been living in Tacoma had to move farther away. And some things like on-time graduation rates are increasing, and all these things are increasing. And like, wait, are we measuring the increase of, or the development of a peaceful community, or are we measuring how quickly we've pushed out low income folks and those problems just got moved to another community? Now another community might see a decrease in on-time graduation rates, right? So it's, this can be very complicated work if we're thinking in terms of systems and spigots.
100%. And I think the other question that all of those sorts of conversations begs is, can people live near where they work? Are they paid enough to live where they work? Are they commuting multiple hours a day just to get to and from their job? How does that impact the rest of their life with their kids, all of that stuff? So, yep.
And can I put you on the spot and almost divert from the peacemaking advocacy theme for a second, but really focus on the trafficking dynamic? Because so many ICD and CED students, international community development and community economic development, both, are really, and there are lots of different topics and themes that students want to learn more about or study for their thesis project or paper. But trafficking is a very common one. But often students kind of come in focusing on sex trafficking. And the trafficking problem is actually bigger and more complicated than that, which I know you have some history with. So you want to talk a little bit about what trafficking actually is and what advocacy and peacemaking looks like in terms of addressing it?
100%. So I'll say just quickly on my own experience of trafficking related work, that one day while I was in the job I did while I was in ICD, the executive director job at the Washington Fair Trade Coalition, I got a call from one of the port staff. And he said, there was an article last week in the Seattle Times that said someone got off at the airport, got in a taxi, and got off at this house where they were going to be trafficked, essentially. And we think that if people are going to be coming through the port of Seattle, if that's on a boat or a plane or however they're coming in, we should have some policy in place, right? We should have a system in place to prevent some of this stuff from happening to the best of our ability. And then he said, and we think people who work on trade policy, should care about this. And I got to sit on a little commission for a couple of years while they developed the whole strategy that they're using. So essentially, there's a lot of push and pull factors that would drive people into either sex or being labor trafficked. That might be a situation with their family needing to send money home. There's also pull factors, right? If you live next to a country that's super, super wealthy, it might benefit you or benefit your family for you to go work or live there. And then you get there and you find out, oh, this wasn't what I thought, right? And so for us, again, my work has not been pulling those people out of those situations. That work is important. There are tons of ICD graduates who do it. I think the work that I have been more suited to do is have conversations about how do we lessen lessen the number of people who are forced into these kinds of push-pull relationships? How do we, you know, in terms of the port, in terms of the government, in terms of policies that different organizations are going to have, in terms of policies for what kinds of labor protections we're going to have as a state or as a country, what can we do in that space to make it so that fewer people end up in that situation, and also make it harder for people who might want to lure people into that situation to do that? Does that answer your question, Brian?
Oh yeah, you know, one of the themes that always comes up in the program, I think this is like a second semester dynamic for students, is, you know, we really broaden the scope of the work to be done and also the challenges that we're trying to address. And sometimes students are like, well, now, great. And on one hand, there's tons of opportunities. On the other hand, now I don't know where I fit. So like, I love direct service. Am I supposed to ignore that and go do advocacy work or something like that? It's like, no, this is there. We need people. We need more people doing community development work in all sorts of manifestations of it, at all different levels. And so some people should continue to be doing, like, 100% of the time, direct service. Even that looks different. Like you're saying, sometimes we're needing to do community development to prevent problems. Sometimes need to be doing community development to help, you know, overcome obstacles and achieve a vision. But also a big part of community development is that reconciliation and healing from traumatic experiences. We're never going to eliminate entirely all these issues. So that means, how do we prevent people from getting into, for instance, trafficking, mitigate the trafficking that is happening, and heal people and help people to become thriving so they don't have to go back into trafficking and be protected afterwards, in addition to all the other policies and things like that. And even the trafficking world, when you are talking about sex trafficking, this is more common now. But for a long time, we had to convince people that trafficking wasn't just focusing on women. Community development required focusing on men, or really on the demand side. This is much more about the demand side and the policy side and the culture of that demand than like just helping the women who fell into the system. So we think about all this stuff very broadly. Andrew, will you tell us a little about yourself and how you see advocacy and peacemaking as part of your career pathway?
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and thanks, Hillary, for sharing that knowledge about her field of work and advocacy. So I do take advocacy very seriously. It's just out of passion. I mean, the first and foremost, I think it's to see what purpose you want to serve doing that advocacy. And through my work, before I joined the city, I worked in a nonprofit, and main focus was homelessness services. And the first thing that attracted me to the job in the city of Bellevue was that the program that the city had established was mainly focused on provide the following priorities, which are provide housing of households earning below 30% in median income, address and prevent homelessness, and housing stability. Focus on underserved and vulnerable residents in Bellevue, for example, homeless families, children, and other eligible population, basically the underserved population. So, an understanding that homelessness is a huge issue in our state. The main thing was to, even when I joined the nonprofit working direct service, was that it was going to give me a platform to advocate for those in most need in our populations, mostly those families, single men or women or youth that are experiencing homelessness. So having gotten the opportunity to work for the city, I knew I would use my voice to advocate for more services, for more low-income housing, for families and individuals experiencing homelessness. And using this course, ICD, International Community Development, helped me a lot in actually putting all the skills and what I've learned from the course in the kind of work that I'm doing. It forms a lot with what I'm doing, understanding those that are underserved in the cities, for example, and how I can advocate for them better, using different courses. I mean, I could mention almost every course that I actually took during the ICD program that has something to do with the work that I'm doing currently, which is amazing. So first of all, like the culture and community and the place course, informs more of the work that I do, understanding if 39%, for example, over 39% of the population of Bellevue is born in over 90 different foreign countries. And that shows how cultural, how diverse the community in Bellevue is. And it informs also on the services that we provide, or that collaborative relationship that we have different providers. And it's not only funding. Yes, I might be on this other side of funding on the programs, but we also have space to advocate for more services for the underserved, have that collaborative relationship that we have with different providers that are serving the community. And that informs our work, which is primarily focused on also equitable lens in when we advocate for these services for the community, for those that need the services from the city. So again, I would mention different fields or different courses or content or skills that I learned from the course that actually still inform the work that I do every day. You know, they do funding. We do fund different providers, service providers in the community, and part of that is also advocacy. Is part also of what we look into, not only direct service, but how much of we want to see in our relationships, how much people that are underserved are being advocated for so they can receive the services they deserve. If I could mention but a few, but I'm happy to answer more questions in that regard.
Yeah, and you know, before I forget, you are an example of an important point we need to make. You know, we used to have one community development program, master's degree program in the School of Global Studies, but now we have two, based on where the work and the jobs are going. So your career, Andrew, was started out more traditional international development, and that's where you thought it was going to go. You graduated from the International Community Development Program, but now you work for local city government and human services and thinking about issues like homelessness, gentrification, and wages. Although, like you said, the community is extremely diverse and international. So your work really still is international community development. There's a lot of bleed over. But just to be clear, for anybody watching the webinar, the both programs have about 70% overlap, mostly the same classes, and you take a lot of classes together. But there are some specific classes for each one. Each one has its own emphasis. So the International Community Development Program focuses more on the competencies required for international work and on what those employers are looking for in a prospective staff member. So more emphasis on intercultural skills, monitoring and evaluation, and sustainability and global environmental issues. Those are some of the main issues and skill sets they're looking for. Community economic development is more targeted to a domestic US audience and has a greater emphasis on the economic development skills and the advocacy and policy, looking specifically at US civics and US political systems. And an important point for that CED training is we see economic development and advocacy and policy as relationship building. We're not economists, and we're not wanting everyone to go online and scream about politics or go run for office, although you could. Largely what we do is work with policy members, working with elected officials, kind of like Andrew is doing now, and helping them understand the nuance, the complexity, the history, the culture of what's going on in the communities, so we can maximize the impact of the policies that we are writing. This is the same work Hillary is doing on a larger scale, has been doing on a larger scale. And then the economic development is largely about connecting people in the communities and organizations that work with communities with living wage jobs or pathways to living wage jobs. So higher education, workforce development agencies, directly with employers and apprenticeships and all that kind of stuff. So with economic development systems and the organizations that do that work really is relationship building, and we see all of this doing this work as relationship building. That's what we're really good at. So at that point, one of the questions, I'm going to open this up to either or both of you who wants to ask, but how do you two see this community development sector changing in terms of advocacy and peacemaking? What is changing in terms of happening at the community level, or in terms of the work that we need to be doing? Or emerging opportunities?
I think it's like such a big question, Brian.
Right.
How
would you solve poverty and ensure peace in the community, Hillary? There you go.
How would I solve? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I think that there's a handful of things to say, and the number one thing that I'll say I'm seeing is a drive toward wanting local people to do local work, which I think is broadly a good thing, right? An organization that I started to work with when I was first living and doing that job in Washington State, did a whole bunch of work in Mozambique and 2 other countries that I cannot remember which ones they were. But they were doing all these, one of them is Ghana. So there's 3 African countries that they were doing a lot of work in. And after about 3 or 4 years of our partnership, that organization actually doesn't exist here in the US anymore, because the foundation that was giving that organization money wanted to fund projects on the ground in those countries with people who were actually doing the work on the ground, who were involved in local stuff that was going on in each one of those countries. And I think that's a thing that I wrestled a lot with when I was in ICD. Like, what is the international role for someone like me? Am I going to end up doing more like consultancy stuff? Am I going to like drop into projects that other local folks are doing? I think there's still an ongoing conversation about what the right ways to plug in that way are for folks that are from the United States, especially. So I think that's one thing that I feel like I see all the time in my work, is like people really wrestling with that question in particular. How is the sector changing? I mean, the Brian kind of said this at the beginning, but AI is like changing everything, right? It's changing what the metrics are, because everybody can write well when you can like type into ChatGPT, like, write me an essay about whatever, right? Different kinds, like what kinds of jobs are available, what those jobs pay, where people live, like a whole slate of things are changing in the sector. And I do appreciate I want to reiterate, I guess, also what Brian said, that both of these programs are valuable and have their own emphases, but I think I'm really excited about the CED stuff in particular, because I think it's going to give folks an opportunity to really focus in on some of the problems that we're experiencing right here in our own backyards, right? And if you're going to take CED and you're an online student, I think everyone's an online student in CED, right, Brian? Okay. So you may be in Atlanta, and folks in Atlanta are dealing with all kinds of stuff that folks in Seattle are not dealing with. Some of the issues are similar, but some of them aren't, right? And so I think the benefit of that program is it's going to give folks the opportunity to really dig into some of the issues that are going on in their space and think about what some of the potential solutions might be to those things. That's my off-the-cuff answer to that very difficult question, Brian.
Yeah, and let me clarify one thing too. So for CED, Community Economic Development, it is there's an online version where you're mostly with other CED online folks. You can do Community Economic Development on campus, but you take more classes with the ICD folks. And then you would come to if you're in CED on campus, you come to the Kirkland campus every other week instead of every week, like the ICD on campus students do. So nitty gritty details you can get in, and so we can all, anybody is interested, talk to Lisa about. And the AI thing is important. And one thing about 2 points to make. One, where we are not pure, we are trying very hard not to be AI skeptics, right? We don't just want to be Luddites. We want to understand that there is certainly damage that AI can and will do, but we also want to understand these tools and be on the front lines of embracing this technology with responsibility and ethics, right? That we need more people who are worried about this technology being on the front lines, determining how we are using it. So how is the community development sector? The community development sector absolutely is going to be transformed by technology, and more of us who have concerns about it need to be involved in how that happens. So we're talking more about AI and these tools, not just ChatGPT, but the whole range of other AI tools that are quickly coming online, and talking about both the threats and also the opportunities it provides for communities, for the sector, and for our career pathways and what that looks like. And I will follow up too and say that you're right. The ICD program is great. And for some people, that international role is very clear. And so the internet, even for an American, a US based person, that international community development program is the one that makes sense. But one reason we do have more US based current or aspiring community development professionals thinking about CED is for exactly what you were talking about, Hillary, that more of us, we actually have done a great job as a sector of emphasizing local hiring and leadership capacity building around the world. So everywhere we have more and more host country nationals, taking up the mantle and doing the work. And so more of us are like, all right, so more of my role might be supporting them from the US. Maybe I do have a role internationally, but also simultaneously, more and more of us in the US are growing up or noticing the pain in our own communities where we're living in right now. So some of us are like, I want to go work internationally. I'm really passionate about those folks. Great. But a lot of us are also saying, but I'm also seeing people in my own community really, really struggling with the same issues that I was going to go over there and solve. And so for some of us, we're thinking that was my career pathway, is doing international development and then coming back home and transitioning it to a domestic setting and realizing those international skill sets were needed domestically. And then for my own sake, I had to train myself and go add certifications in the economic development and advocacy. And one other point about the CED, we also have the Community Economic Development 9-credit graduate certificate program that someone can start and then transition that into the full degree if somebody wanted to, just as a point. So, all right, Andrew, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I love what I'm hearing about CED. I did not take it, but coming from, my work and my previous work in the nonprofit world, and looking at the issues that we have locally, and being an advocate or working directly with the communities to work or tackle these barriers in our communities. One of them I talked about homelessness, but I'm glad that my current position right now with the city gives me a larger scope of knowing and understanding the work most providers are doing across the board, like the providers that we work with. So I just want to say that I like the focus of CED because it's more also localized, and there's a lot of need for people, for social changes in the field locally. So that's one thing that right now, currently, we're actually doing site monitoring. So I'm glad that I took monitoring and evaluation as a course in ICD. It still works locally, but most of the challenges that these providers are having is also staffing. And also people that can be on the front lines, or people who can work in these fields to serve their communities. So it's very important to empower people who are actually very passionate about change, about tackling these issues that are happening locally. So I'm glad that CED is being introduced and as a course at the university. And I think this will serve the community that needs so many people to come and join in the field of tackling these barriers that our community or community members are facing.
Could one of you, and Hillary, I'm going to throw this to you first, could one of you give us at least one concrete example of what advocacy actually looks like?
I'm happy to start. I think the kind of advocacy that Andrew and I do is probably a little bit different. My impression from this conversation is Andrew is a government official, and those are the people that I do advocacy toward, right? They're the people that I'm trying to convince that something is the right thing, or putting out reports or that kind of thing. And what does advocacy look like in a real concrete example? I think for me personally, it has looked like all kinds of different things. Sometimes that is like a really off the cuff thing that happens. Like when I was, again, working in Chicago, a governor signed a bill on the like Friday of Easter weekend, basically, that he knew was going to cut all of the nonprofit funding across the state. Right. So a whole bunch of us showed up in Springfield on Monday morning when we were back at work after Easter, to kind of have a little mini protest of sorts, right? And we're all little NGO people, and we're not crazy, but we are out there kind of saying to the governor, like, hey, why would you cut our funding on a Friday of Easter weekend at a year when there's so many immigrants and refugees that are coming into the country? Like, this doesn't make any sense. So that's one example. I think the other kind of advocacy that I kind of find more of a home in, honestly, is really just focused around educational stuff. It's really focused on picking an issue that you're going to care about. For me, for a couple of years, it was vaccine access in many of the global South countries. Getting your resources together and going out to a community, and maybe you say, I want you guys to sign on to this statement saying we want X, Y, and Z out of the vaccine program that the government's putting out, that kind of thing. So for me, that's what it's looked like. I wonder, Andrew, if you have an example that you'd like to share as well.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I'd like to share, actually, interestingly enough, we in the Human Services Department do also a lot of advocacy, also for the folks that are being served. So one way that we do that is also through like equitable trainings or information that we provide to the Human Services Commission. They're the ones that make the final decision. So we have staff recommendations that we make sure that voices of the people that need this support are heard. So it's up to us to invite different groups, different focus groups, different providers to the table, so they can actually hear their voices directly, not only just through funding, but also get to understand what is being done on the ground. So we do a lot of advocacy in that capacity. And while we do also technical assistance in different fields for the providers that we do fund, we also actually give them the platform to actually also let us know what we should work on and what we should improve on and things like that. So there's a lot of space for advocacy through us, and also encouragement through other providers that are serving our communities.
Hillary, you have some thoughts you wanted to share?
Yeah, no, 100%. I wanted to note just a couple of things about the fact that I felt like Andrew had done such a good job of tying some of the work that he's doing back to some of the ICD classes. I don't know which of the crossover classes are the crossover classes, but I'll just say quickly that the things that were the most helpful in terms of coursework for me in ICD, we had a program evaluation class that essentially helped us look at the entirety of a program. In my work, we might say like the entire supply chain of a program that we were working on, and be able to identify which pieces were breaking down and causing the program to like ultimately not be successful, or help not that the program isn't getting us the metrics that we were hoping would be the outcome of such a project. So for me, program evaluation was incredibly helpful. I think that we also had a project management class, and that was like a super, super helpful class for me personally, just in terms of being able to look at, again, the broad scope of a project, the timelines, how to move things around when things aren't going the way that you necessarily want them to, and that kind of thing. And also in terms of hard skills, I think that was like the thing for me when I went to ICD, is like I really wanted a set of like these hard skills, right? And I also got tons of like soft skill development through classes like globalization and development, community development, that kind of thing. But also really enjoyed the fundraising course, which I assume is still in place. It's such an important skill.
Still got to raise money.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think those were the big ones that I really appreciated. But I do want to emphasize, especially for ICD folks, that there is this like hard skills development space, but there's so many of the soft skills as well. Researching, you know, the community development stuff, learning to look at all the different economic factors that might be at play in a community and that sort of thing.
One of the things that I do fairly regularly is contact ICD alumni and development, international and domestic development agencies, and just HR folks, and just talking about what are the competencies and skills, and how do you define, what is the language you use to articulate those skills, and make sure that we have those hard and soft skills embedded in the program. And the hard skills are critical to do the work well. What most HR folks say is actually the soft skills. They're all kind of like, I could teach someone to go like use our database, our system. I got to teach them how to use our system anyway. What I really need is somebody who can listen and like actively listen, and somebody who can deal with ambiguity and overcome failure and work as a team and creative problem solving and grit. And so we have, we emphasize and try to practice those things in the program quite a bit as well. We also talk a lot about how to articulate those, that you have those competencies to an employer directly and through examples of work that you've done in and out of the program. So that's an area of emphasis for us as well. I'll give a quick example for myself, just because I can, because I want to, of that peacemaking as advocacy work for myself, like just in the last few years. And part of my community development peacemaking work is thinking about homelessness. And a lot of my career path has become focused on wages. And so a lot of that peacemaking work is saying, boy, we need more people to be earning a living wage job in order to attain all of the other goals that we want in a community. But most people the community understands this, or the community, people in a community understand this. People outside of the community trying to serve the community often do not. So a lot of the advocacy work is basically saying, hey, getting someone a job that pays $1 more than the minimum wage per hour is not getting it done. I know we define that as a success on the organizational end, but a living wage job is probably $7 or $8 per hour higher than the jobs we are currently getting people. And in most communities, pulling that off is really, really hard, which is why starting is with that advocacy work and saying, hey, we all need to be on the same page about our goal is. And in like Washington, where the minimum wage is, I think, $15.74 an hour right now, we're really good at getting people $16 an hour jobs. And if we're not getting people $25 or $30 an hour jobs with some financial literacy training and working on their credit scores and credit histories and managing that stuff, nothing else that we do is going to stick. But we don't have a lot of $30 an hour jobs in our community. But that's the kind of work that we're doing. And so how do we help ensure we have those jobs, or make sure people don't necessarily need to earn $30 an hour for a while, or on a pathway to do that? The other one that I think a lot about is part of my advocacy work has been redefining homelessness, right? So we think about homelessness in terms of the tents that we see on the side of the road. And a lot of my advocacy work has been, no, I understand we need that. Unfortunately, I got to put a pin in that problem, because once somebody becomes homeless, solving that problem is incredibly complex and incredibly inexpensive. But meanwhile, we have a whole bunch of families and children who are experiencing homelessness, which you can't see. So, families, with children, when they experience homelessness, they might move into their car. Often they're going to be couch surfing. And that's where things like abuse and trauma happen, especially for children. So a lot of the advocacy work has been saying the homelessness that you can't see is the homelessness we need to be focused on. And also how we do that is wages. Like that, usually single mom needs to be earning enough money to be able to provide stable housing and food for those children, so that we don't have another generation of these problems down the road. Now, eventually we'll have to come back to that pin we put in the tents we see on the side of the road, but we really need to focus on this issue over here, and then actually execute a high quality project to address it. So that's a lot of, and sometimes the work is the same work we've always been doing, running youth programs, the food banks, all kinds of stuff, water projects and hydroelectric projects, all that kind of stuff. But increasingly we're bringing in or supporting or partnering with those other advocacy issues. And where are the living wage jobs, or how do we mitigate the fact that we don't have enough living wage jobs? How do we deal with housing policy and zoning issues? Our language we have to become familiar with as community development professionals. So that's largely the world that we live in.
Can I jump in and add one thing quickly, Brian?
Yeah.
A church that I'm connected to does a whole bunch of fundraising and runs a program based on the premise that it's much easier to keep people in housing that they're in right now than let them lapse because they can't afford 1 month of rent and then have to pay all the upfront costs to get them back into housing later. And so their whole program is just helping people who can't afford this 1 month of rent, but will be better off in a month, be in a different situation in a month. And I think it's just an interesting premise, an interesting program, right?
I will not spend 5 hours talking about financial literacy and economic development, but a lot of my work was developing programs that actually got people at the time from $13 an hour to $24 an hour. Hooray! And then all those people kind of kept coming back in and having more issues a year later. And it was like, oh, $24 an hour sounds like a fortune until you actually try to live off it and move out of, like, maybe for $13 an hour, now $15 an hour, you can maybe pay rent with some roommates who are shady, but you might be living in a community that is completely unsafe. You're like, this is completely unacceptable for my kids to live here. So you get a higher wage, and then you move into a better apartment complex where there's not, where your kids can actually play outside. And that ate up all the extra money that you were earning. And you were hoping when you got that new job now, and maybe you need a car to get to that new job, and you didn't have a car before when you were maybe working at Domino's, which was on a bus line. And so that, and if you don't have a good credit history, that car is really expensive. So if you're not careful, if we're not proactive and thinking about this and doing this with the community, who always tells us this ahead of time, the community understands what's coming. And when we develop these projects, they always say, if you don't include this piece, it's not going to work a year or two from now. And historically, we've sometimes ignored that. And then we've gotten a lot better about at the beginning of a project, doing it with the community and incorporating their feedback so we maximize success and do all these things simultaneously. So, all right, that's the last thing I'm going to talk about that, because I could go on and on and on for about that stuff for ever and ever and ever. And if you join the program, you will hear about this for 2 years straight.
Allow me to say something, just to echo what you just said. And I think you mentioned very important things to take note of in the homelessness services, in the different advocacy that different groups do, even on the government side here, advocating for better wages, mostly for their providers that are working in direct services. So part of that actually, like our next meeting with the commission is that we're going to have different providers coming to present and talk about their staffing problems, how they're having difficulty recruiting, how they're having problem maintaining staffing based on the fact that they can't actually, people have gone different fields because of the wages are not enough and things like that. So it's more of advocating for them while the commission is thinking about funding, thinking about also the right wages for providers that are doing the work on the ground. So it's important that that is taken care of. Another thing is talking about my own work and advocating for housing stability. You can't talk about housing stability if you're not talking about providing correlated services on site. That's, for example, if people are moving out of homelessness, if they're still having different struggles, behavioral health and other needs, so they need these services on site to maintain housing. So those are the kind of things, like I said, that attracted me to the job, because there's one thing is getting housing, one thing is stability. So stability requires a lot. It's just not getting, a key to an apartment or something like that, because you might not afford it. You might not, also you might have other challenges, behavioral health and other needs that you may want to have addressed. So these are the kind of things that I like to see that even the city is advocating for, so which is amazing. So advocacy is in all kind of ways as we present things to the council, the commission, and talking about these issues that are facing, that our community members are facing. It's something that I love and enjoy doing, and very well informed with the kind of skills and that I gained from the course that I had. I think just to say a little bit, of course, of other courses, as Hilary was talking about, things like fundraising and grant writing, and because we do contracting with providers, these are the kind of things I look at, and they resonate so much with what I've studied. So it's really great. Like the monitoring and evaluation, we're currently doing on-site visits to providers. One is that collaborative relationship, but also making sure that they're in compliance with the contracts that they have with the city. But that practicality of the course of monitoring and evaluation when we did it at the university prepared me so much for this. So there's a lot that's not new to me, but it's like, oh my God, this is really great. I'm glad I took the course and understand this beforehand. And that also helps me, of course, help my other colleagues if there are things that I need to share that I also did study. So the research for social change was also another amazing one that, the research methodology, sometimes you might, study it and you don't know when you're going to use it. So it's really important to see that. It's really great to see that we're using all these skills in our work currently. So just wanted to make sure I share that.
Cool. That's very helpful. Yeah, we go on and talk about all the different classes and the integrated project and all that kind of stuff. But I love hearing I can tell all the language that you picked up, Andrew, and the year that you've been doing the human services work in Bellevue. It also reminds me, on the one hand, this work is so serious and it can be frustrating and it can be uncomfortable. But those of us who do it joyfully, right? If you didn't find joy in doing the work, if it wasn't a privilege to do this work, you wouldn't bother doing it in the first place. So in the program, we talk about heavy stuff, but we also love talking about these issues. And we're also hopeful. Like, we know there's so much that we can do if we choose as a community to do it. And so a lot of our work is that we talk a lot about now. We have a new storytelling class because a lot of the work is telling stories and raising empathy in the community and getting more, kind of breaking more people out of the kind of creeping nihilism and saying, no, everything isn't breaking and terrible everywhere. We can fix a ton of stuff that's going on. We just have to choose to do it. So let's go do it. And we want to be the ones to go start and say, I'm going to go try something. Maybe it's going to fail, but I'm going to handle that fail well. And I'm going to learn. I'm going to try again. And I'm going to do it with the community. And if I fail and try again, the community is going to be even more on board because they know I'm serious, right? So that's the kind of stuff that gets a lot of people when they hear that kind of stuff, like, that's not for me. But the kind of people enrolled in this program who are like, yeah, I want to do that. I want to get uncomfortable. And not everybody has to be the ones going out and doing that. We also need all that support work and the fundraising and the admin work. There's a ton of work that goes into all aspects of community development. We need to call in Lisa to talk a little bit about logistics before we finish up. But first, Andrew, Hillary, any burning thoughts that we need to cover before Lisa joins us? I'm sure you have like 10, but is there anyone in particular that needs to be addressed?
I don't have any super hot burning things to say, but for folks who are watching this webinar, I really look forward to meeting you at policy and advocacy class in the community and economic development program, if that is your program choice. And good luck. You're going to be on a good journey.
Yeah, I also wanted to just echo what you just said, Hillary, just welcoming everyone and understanding it's two great courses, and you'll be happy you took them. And just want to say I enjoyed every minute that I was at the university doing it, and I'm glad that it's actually informing the work I'm doing. Yeah, and I just want to lastly say, like what Brian just shared about even preparing you for the uncomfort and hard work, but also just bearing in mind that the work you're doing is benefiting the community. Sometimes that's more enriching than the challenges that you face along the road.
Cool. Thanks, you both. Lisa, you want to talk a little about logistics?
Hi, sure. There's a lot I could go into with logistics about these programs, and I was hoping we'd have lots of questions. We have a few questions, but I just want to encourage everyone, please feel free to ask questions of everyone here, not just of me. But in terms of logistics, I think the question that has come up most often, and also today, which of these two programs should I choose and how do I know? Okay, so they have slightly different focuses. As you've been hearing, international community development, community economic development, and I'm going to have Brian answer this question as well. But one of the things that distinguishes the new MAICD is the slight focus on US contexts. So in some classes, you're not going to notice this because you're going to be with everyone. And there's just going to be a wide variety of focus areas that are chosen individually by each of the students in both of our programs. And so you're going to have that global scope anyway. But some of the coursework that takes place in the Master of Arts in Community Economic Development does have more of a US focus. And it is not actually available for international students on an F1 visa. So if that's you, it's already decided for you that you should do the International Community Development Program. But this is good news. You don't have to miss out on the content if that's what you want to do. You can still take the certificate and the ICD program. So if you're really having a hard time deciding, you could do the certificate in Community Economic Development and the ICD program and the International Community Development Program for the master's degree. It will add an additional 6 credits to your load. And you will have a couple of the courses that are run in a very specific community economic development way. And that is that while they are online, you will have approximately every 2 weeks a virtual session. So you'll have a little bit less of the traditional online work in these courses, but you will be talking face-to-face in a required virtual session with these classes. So that is going to be difficult for people in some parts of the world. That's another reason why this is more of a US focused program. But we don't want to discourage anyone who really has it on their hearts to take one of these classes, advocacy and policy or economic development, from taking these classes. And I just think as well, it's a great way to start. If you're hearing this now and you're going, I'd like to start, but who has time to start a master's degree right now? Well, you can jump into these classes, just one now and one next semester, and then you can go straight into the rest of the master's degree and you can take your time choosing which one. If you choose ICD at that point, you're transferring, you've got essentially, there's a third class that is part of this, which is part of both programs, and that is community development. That's also in the certificate. So there's just a lot of different options. Now with the ICD program, in particular, I want to emphasize that if you are working between cultures, or if you have a particular heart for issues in ecology, which is a slight focus, I will add, within that program right now. You do not have to have a focus on ecology to appreciate the International Community Development Program, but if you do, you will particularly appreciate that that is accounted for throughout the curriculum of that program. And it is something that is a global issue, and therefore it is a particular emphasis in that program. So I hope that's helpful. Brian, what would you say to this question?
The international domestic part of it, yes, the advocacy and policy is more focused on US systems, although the skill sets of advocacy and policy are still transferable everywhere. And similarly with economic development, that relationship building component is similar, although we focus on US systems and workforce development and higher ed systems. But the other international versus domestic, there's not a very hard line, because we still have domestic folks doing ICD, and we'll still have some international folks who are going to do CED. People are doing the international community development, like Andrew's example. You might be serving, if you're working with refugees and immigrants in a domestic setting, resettling, then you might still want to do the ICD program. So for me, when I talk to students about it, I think more about how you want to market yourself to prospective employers. And so if the community economic development language is closer to what you think employers are going to want to hear, or the ICD, then that is the primary factor I consider. You could always either do the certificate, like Lisa was saying, or audit the additional classes. We can get you those skill sets. But I really think about what the employers want to look at.
That's a good point. And maybe it would also be helpful if I mention what are some of the class differences, because for many people, it's going to boil down to, well, what do I want to study? And also, when do I want to study and how do I want to study? If I want to do a campus program, do I want it to be every week, or do I want to do campus, but it's kind of light, come every 2 weeks? And so I want to do, if my program involves trips, do I want them to be local in the United States, or do I want them to be at least partially outside of the United States? So classes, so that's kind of some of the how, but back to classes. The MAICD classes include culture, community and place, disaster relief and development, monitoring and evaluation, ecological leadership, and integrative project. And similarly, MAICD classes include macroeconomics and economic development, culture and diversity, children, poverty and development, advocacy and policy, and thesis. So very similar but different, and we can always send you this information. You can compare it, you can show people, and you can delve into the course descriptions and see what seems best to you. So another question people have asked, is it too late to start now? No, it is not too late to start now. So if you want to, you can definitely still get this together. Now, obviously, that's going to be a little bit difficult if you are coming from another country that has a short timeline on visas and you need to pull it together in order to arrive. But we can still work with you to make sure that you could join the cohort that is starting now. Even if you couldn't quite get your visa appointment on time, you could do a semester online and then come to the cohort that is on campus. So there's all kinds of variations. So just reach out. Let's see, any other questions have come in? How much does it cost and how can I afford it? Okay, so $738 per credit, and there are 36 credits. So the math, I have not done the math to see the total because it does vary just a little bit with the fees and so forth, but it's going to be under 30,000 for sure. Now, we have a couple of new scholarships that are in place that people should know about. First of all, if you are working for an organization that is a member of the Accord Network, you can automatically, essentially, get a $1,500 scholarship that is applied over 3 different semesters. Similarly, if you are a member of an organization or working for an organization that has an organizational membership in CCDA, Christian Community Development Network, the same. If you currently, for now, if you have a personal membership in CCDA, which might be a good investment, you can get a $1,500 scholarship when you apply to this program, to one of these programs, either of them. And very specifically, if you are from a country with a lower GDP, so for instance, 25% of the US GDP or less than that, if I'm correct on that, then you will qualify for a 50% tuition discount to the online Master of Arts in International Community Development. So that's a big deal. So hopefully that helps you to put together a plan to raise some money. I always recommend doing a lot of outside scholarship research as well and planning for this to the extent possible. But I also am a big believer in sometimes it's just the right time and you have to jump in there. For most people who are in the United States, the FAFSA is available and you could, with the Stafford loan, pay for the entire program. So sometimes you just have to ask yourself, is this what I want to be doing in a year? Because many times once you get into a program, it just sets a chain in motion and you can be doing something else or something different or something more once you have started. Many times you don't even have to wait to graduate from the program. So it's definitely a personal question of when to start and how to pay for it, but there are lots of options and we're happy to talk through them. I think that was the last question on logistics. Oh, but it's about 7. It's been about an hour, so perfect timing. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you, Hillary and Andrew, for joining us. Much appreciated.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Agreed. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. See you later, everyone. Keep in touch.